fire licked the sky like an enraged dragon. Crimson light tore through the night of Redmont Valley, a town normally filled only with the chirping of crickets and the damp scent of post-rain grass. But tonight, smoke billowed from the animal barn behind an old wooden house. The smell of burning timber clung to the air like a warning. Screaming over the sirens was the voice of a young girl, limping desperately toward the flames. "Shadow, don't leave me. Hold on, please." A petite girl with brown hair matted in ash, cheeks speckled with soot, strained with all her might to drag a black shepherd from the blaze. In her hand wasn't just a leash, but a scorched leather bag, what she called the last thing her father left behind. A notebook filled with handwritten training notes. To let it burn would be to burn every memory she'd fought so hard to keep alive. On the porch, her mother stood in a nightgown, screaming as neighbors held her back. "Madison, where are you? Don't go in there. Please, please." But Madison was already there, caught between life and death. And what held her there wasn't fear, but something deeper. As if a father long gone was whispering in her mind, "Don't let go. Not yet." And if you're wondering why an 11-year-old girl with a leg brace, a seizing dog, and a scorched notebook could bring an entire town to a standstill, you should know this didn't start with the fire. It started with an auction. 6 months earlier, the sky looked just like this. Gray clouds hung over the dry hills of Redmont, hinting at early spring rain. Madison Carter, her left leg strapped in steel, quietly counted money inside a rusted tin box. Crumpled bills, stacked carefully by occasion, birthday money, hand-drawn greeting card commissions, a few dollars for cleaning Mr. Miller's garage. A total of $42.30. Every cent smelled of sweat and tears. She hadn't told her mother where she was going. Something inside pulled her like a string, a voice too quiet to explain. A week earlier, Mrs. Green, the elderly neighbor with silver hair, who had once worked alongside her father in the Army K-9 unit, had stopped by with a warm apple tart and a small piece of news. "They're auctioning off dogs from that failed service center tomorrow," Mrs. Green had said. "Sad, really, but there's one looks a lot like Shadow, your dad's last project." Shadow. The name struck Madison like an arrow. She barely remembered the dog's face, just that her father had smiled one last time while petting a large black shepherd. He had turned and said, "If I don't make it back, be friends with him. He never betrays anyone." But her father never came back. A midnight car crash stole him away and left Madison with a limp and a mother hollowed by grief. The next morning, as the rain stopped, Madison arrived at the fairground where the auction was being held. Men in jackets smoked and laughed. No one noticed a quiet girl in the back clutching a tin box. At the animal pen section, most of the dogs barked, wagged their tails, or lazily yawned. But one dog lay collapsed in the farthest cage, motionless, fur matted, ribs visible like bars beneath its skin, one ear folded down. But its eyes, when Madison met its gaze, it felt like staring into her own reflection after the accident. No hope, no trust, but not enough strength left to hate the world. "That's Shadow," said a man nearby. "Nobody's gonna buy him. Neurological issues. Seizures. Not worth the vet bills." Madison said nothing. She clutched the money box tighter and stepped closer, eyes fixed. "Shadow," she whispered. The dog stirred ever so slightly. When the auctioneer's hammer fell and declared, "Sold for $42 to the girl in the back," the barn fell strangely silent. A crippled child buying a dying dog. What could be more ridiculous? But only Madison knew her hands were trembling not from fear, but because she could feel her father standing behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder, nodding silently. People would laugh, but they had no idea they had just witnessed the beginning of something that would change the town forever. Inside Mrs. Green's old pickup truck, Madison sat as still as stone. The rusty tin box that once held her savings now lay empty on her lap, and in the back seat, the large black dog was panting heavily, his dim eyes gazing out the window in silence. She didn't say a word the entire ride home, not when Mrs. Green gently asked if she was all right, nor when the gravel road caused her leg brace to rattle softly. Something heavy was pressed against her chest, part worry, part hope and something deeper that felt a lot like fear. Fear that she wouldn't be enough to save him. The wooden house where Madison lived with her mother sat at the bottom of a small hill, surrounded by overgrown lavender bushes, and an apple orchard left to wither since her father passed. The training shed, where he had once worked with dogs, now lay buried beneath cobwebs and fallen leaves. A world that had gone to sleep 3 years ago, the day Mr. Carter never came home. When Mrs. Green pulled up the gate, Madison quietly opened the back door. Shadow still lay there, unmoving. "Do you need help?" Mrs. Green asked. "No, I want to do it myself." She slipped her arms under Shadow's belly, lifting gently. The dog growled weakly but didn't resist. Step by step, Madison helped him down from the truck, and together they hobbled toward the porch. Two abandoned souls searching for shelter. When her mother, Laura, opened the door and saw them, she froze for a few seconds. "Madison, what is this?" I just wanted to bring him home. I bought him. Nobody else wanted him." "You bought him? With what money?" Madison didn't answer. She walked past her mother, leading Shadow into the old storage room, laying out a blanket, placing a bowl of water beside him, and only then turned to face her mother's worried, angry eyes. "Do you know what you've done? Do you know how expensive and dangerous it is to care for a sick dog? He could seize at any moment." "I know," Madison said, softly but firmly, "but he used to be a therapy dog, and I think I know how to help him. Dad taught me." The mention of Mr. Carter made Laura go silent. Her face relaxed for a moment, then collapsed again into fatigue. Exhaustion carved deep lines around her eyes, worn from night shifts and extra jobs she took on to keep them afloat. "Madison, your father's gone. What he knew, it's not enough to save either of you. But I remember, I still have his notebook." Without another word, Madison returned to Shadow, laying a hand on his head, gently stroking. The dog closed his eyes, as if this was the first human touch he'd felt that didn't come with judgment or conditions. The first 7 days were a test of patience and heart. Shadow wouldn't eat, wouldn't bark, wouldn't move. Every kind of food, from cold cuts to thin porridge, was ignored. The only sign he was alive came from his shallow breathing. Madison spent hours beside him, reading, talking, even playing old recordings of her dad. At night, she slept on the floor right next to him. Some nights, she woke up to tiny sounds, afraid he had slipped away, only to find his tired eyes still watching her in the dark. Laura said little. She cooked, cleaned, and occasionally stood in the doorway watching her daughter with an expression hard to read. Maybe love, maybe worry, maybe a bit of broken trust. Until the 8th morning, Madison was flipping through her father's training notebook, a collection of crooked handwriting, hand-drawn dog diagrams, and personal notes. She stumbled across a page carefully folded and marked at the edge. Dog 071, Shadow. Reacts to special command. Whisper plus palm touch. Only handler with bond can trigger. She read it 3 times, then sat up straight, eyes fixed on Shadow. "Shadow," she called softly. "Palm touch." She raised her hand, palm down, the way her father used to when commanding a dog to lie down. Shadow didn't move, but then one ear twitched. Madison tried again, this time resting her hand on her knee, whispering like a prayer. "Shadow, rest." The dog looked up, his eyes still dim, but deep inside there was a flicker, small, weak, but real. Madison gasped. She reached out and touched his forehead, and for the first time, Shadow didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned gently against her knee and exhaled like someone who had finally found a place to fall asleep. When Laura walked past the doorway and saw them, she didn't enter. She just stood there, one hand on the doorframe, the other covering her mouth to stifle a sound. She hadn't seen her daughter smile, not since the funeral. But now, Madison was smiling, faint but real, as if someone had quietly returned a piece of light she thought she had lost. And perhaps in that moment, Laura understood. There are things no medicine, no adult advice, no hard work can fix. Only love and a little belief, enough to reach out to something everyone else left behind. The two of them didn't talk much that evening. But when Laura silently placed another blanket next to Shadow, then turned away without taking it back, Madison knew. Her mother had begun to believe, not in Shadow, but in her. Once again, the house settled into an unfamiliar rhythm. Every morning, Madison would wake early, limp down the hallway with her brace, clicking softly on the wooden floor, and sit beside Shadow in the small laundry room they had turned into a space. She would whisper the same phrases. "It's okay. I'm here. You're safe now." Sometimes, she read aloud from her father's notebook. Sometimes, she just sat there, saying nothing at all. And Shadow, he listened. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't wag his tail. But he no longer flinched when she touched him. His ears would twitch when she spoke, his breathing slow when she laid her hand gently on his side. It wasn't trust. Not yet, but it was something like recognition. It was the beginning. By the second week, Madison began documenting everything. Her father used to write down notes obsessively, dates, commands, reactions, body posture, even what a dog's eye movements meant during stress. She copied that habit religiously, using a secondhand spiral notebook from last semester's math class. Day 12. Shadow made eye contact for 3 full seconds after a palm touch. No growling, no retreat, still not eating dry kibble, but took 2 pieces of boiled chicken from hand. Day 15. Reacted slightly to the word heel. Eyes flicked left. Could be memory? Try again tomorrow. Her page is filled with observations, small notations, fragments of hope. Meanwhile, Laura, her mother, watched from the sidelines, torn between admiration and fear. She admired her daughter's dedication, the fierce way she protected that broken dog. But she also feared what would happen if Shadow didn't recover. If Madison's heart once again got shattered under the weight of something she couldn't fix. There were moments when Laura would pause outside the laundry room, listening to her daughter speak to the dog as if to a ghost. "I know you're scared," Madison whispered one evening. "So am I, but maybe we can be scared together." Shadow, lying with his back to her, shifted slightly, pressing one paw against her foot. That was the first night he didn't shake in his sleep. On day 19, something shifted. Shadow was standing. Not for long, barely 30 seconds, but he stood without collapsing. Madison nearly dropped the bowl of rice she was carrying. She clapped quietly, eyes wide with disbelief. "You did it," she cried. "You actually stood up." Shadow tilted his head, as if trying to process her excitement. He didn't wag his tail. But for the first time, his eyes, those deep, dark eyes, held something more than pain. They held curiosity. Madison rushed to document it all. She even called Mrs. Green, breathless, recounting every detail. The old woman chuckled softly over the phone. "Your daddy would be proud, honey," she said. "It's not about teaching a dog commands. It's about teaching him to believe again." But the joy was short-lived. That night, Madison witnessed Shadow's first seizure. It happened just after dinner. One moment he was lying peacefully by her feet, and the next his body went rigid, legs kicking, mouth foaming slightly. Madison froze, heart pounding, panic rising. But then something clicked. Her father's notes. She'd read about seizures before. She dropped to her knees beside Shadow, keeping a safe distance but speaking calmly. "I'm right here. You're not alone. Just breathe, boy. You're safe." She timed it with her watch. 3 minutes, 22 seconds. When it ended, Shadow lay exhausted, trembling. Madison sat beside him for over an hour, stroking his fur, whispering soft nonsense the way her dad used to whisper to their dogs after long training sessions. When her mother found them, Madison curled up beside Shadow, both of them barely awake. Laura didn't say a word. She just wrapped a blanket around the two and sat nearby until morning. In the days that followed, Shadow's recovery took on a new form. Yes, he was still weak. Yes, the seizures worried everyone, especially Mrs. Green, who began stopping by daily with supplements and calming herbs she swore by. But something was changing. Shadow was beginning to respond to commands, not the usual ones, but specific ones. Obscure phrases Madison found buried deep in her father's handwritten scripts. Shadow, nourish. That word, nourish, seemed to unlock something. The first time she said it, he looked straight at her, then limped toward the bowl of chicken and ate. Not much, but enough to make Madison cry. From that point on, everything became a study in patterns. Madison tested phrases, observed reactions, documented meticulously. Shadow, it turned out, wasn't untrainable. He was overtrained, specialized. He had been taught to respond only to custom commands, possibly from a single handler, Madison's father. That realization hit her one rainy evening as she sat on the porch, staring out at the gray sky. Shadow lay beside her, head resting on her knee, breathing steady. "Dad trained you, didn't he?" she whispered. "Before he died. That's why you respond to me. You remember him." The dog didn't move, but his breathing matched hers. Two creatures, damaged in different ways, finding a rhythm that only they could hear. Later that week, Shadow did something that stunned even Laura. They were at the small local park. Madison insisted on giving him short walks to rebuild strength. When a young boy, maybe 6, began screaming near the swing set, he was rocking back and forth, hands over his ears, sobbing uncontrollably. His mother tried to calm him, but nothing worked. Shadow, without command, moved. He slowly walked toward the boy, stopping just a few feet away. Then he lay down, completely still, and looked at the child with soft, steady eyes. The boy froze. His sobs softened. Then he reached out and touched Shadow's fur. Just like that, the screaming stopped. Madison watched in awe. "That's what you were trained for," she whispered. "To help, just like Dad." When they returned home, Madison sat at the kitchen table, notebook open, heart full. Shadow wasn't just healing. He was helping her heal, too. And maybe, just maybe, he was meant to do more than survive. Maybe he was meant to serve again. But this time with her, Shadow was changing. Not just physically, though his body had grown stronger, his coat darker and fuller, his step steadier, but emotionally, too. He no longer flinched at sudden noises or shrank away from strangers. He listened, he watched, he responded, and the town noticed. Word spread through Redmont Valley in the way only news in a small town could. Fast and curious. "That Carter girl," they said. "You know, the one with the limp, she saved that broken dog. And now, he saved a boy at the park." One story became 2, then 10. A boy with autism had pet Shadow for 15 straight minutes after weeks of refusing touch. A girl with night terrors slept peacefully for the first time after reading aloud to him. Shadow sat through it all, still and steady, as if he understood the fragile things children carried inside them. And Madison? She was glowing, not in the loud, showy way of children craving attention, but in a quiet, undeniable warmth. Her limp hadn't vanished, but her steps were quicker. Her voice, once hushed, now carried intention. She was training again, living again. But healing never comes without interruption. It started with a knock on the door. A tall man in his late 50s, dressed in a sleek gray suit, stood on their porch one late afternoon. He introduced himself as Dr. Daniel Colton, Director of Canine Therapeutic Futures, a foundation working with advanced animal-assisted therapy programs. He spoke smoothly, his words lined with polish. He had read about Madison and Shadow. He said, through local coverage, the story had touched his heart. "We're impressed," he smiled, handing Laura a thick folder. "Your daughter has accomplished what seasoned professionals sometimes cannot." Shadow's bond with children, especially those with neurological conditions, it's extraordinary. He proposed a partnership, full sponsorship for Madison's continuing work, veterinary care for Shadow, education funding for Madison's future, and a training facility just outside Redmont, all funded by the foundation. In exchange, they wanted to integrate Shadow into a broader therapy model, which at first sounded harmless. But when Madison flipped through the proposal that night, something didn't sit right. Buried in the terms was a clause stating that Shadow would be assigned to a rotating schedule of facilities, moving between cities handled by certified adult trainers. Madison would be credited, but not allowed to retain full custody. "No," she whispered, staring at the paper. "No way." Her mother looked up from the kitchen sink. already sensing the storm coming. They declined the offer politely. Dr. Colton accepted with a gracious smile, but something in his eyes cooled. A week passed. Then things started happening. Unmarked vehicles began parking near the Carter home, idling too long before driving off. One night, Madison caught a man in dark clothing peering into their shed. He disappeared into the woods before she could scream. Shadow changed, too. He became anxious at night, pacing, growling lowly at the corners of the house. His seizures returned, milder but more frequent. Madison noted the patterns in her journal. She started keeping him inside her room. One morning, Laura found an envelope in their mailbox. No return address. Inside was a typed letter. You're standing in the way of something bigger than a backyard project. Think about what your father would have wanted. His work reaching the world. Madison's hands trembled. They don't know what he wanted, she whispered. But I do. Then came the fire. It was a moonless night when Madison woke to Shadow's frantic barking. Not his regular, someone's at the door bark, but a scream, desperate, urgent. Smoke already snaked under the door. She grabbed her leg brace, shoved her foot into a shoe, and crawled toward the hallway. Her mother was shouting from the living room, already dialing 911. Madison, stay back. But Madison didn't hear. Or maybe she did, and chose not to listen. Shadow was still out there, in the shed, where they kept the training supplies, where Madison kept her father's notebook, the old hard drive of training footage, and all the progress she recorded for months. She burst through the back door, choking on smoke, eyes stinging. The shed was half engulfed. Flames crackled along the roof, and the walls glowed orange. Madison screamed for Shadow. Then she saw him. He was inside, pawing at a leather satchel, her father's bag. She tried calling him out, but he wouldn't leave, not without it. With no time left, Madison covered her nose and mouth with her sleeve and ran in. She could barely see. Heat pulsed like an open oven. Shadow bit down on the bag and moved toward her. Together, they staggered out, just as part of the roof collapsed behind them. She collapsed on the grass, wheezing, the leather bag clenched in her hand. Shadow lay beside her, chest heaving, fur singed. But he was alive. So was she. The fire truck sirens howled in the distance. The following morning, Sheriff Dean visited them in the hospital. He had reviewed footage from a wildlife camera Madison had hidden after the suspicious visitors began. A man matching Dr. Colton's description had been seen pouring accelerant near the shed. It wasn't just arson. It was targeted. But Colton had vanished. The foundation address he had given didn't exist. The contact number disconnected. Laura was furious. Madison was quiet. Shadow, sedated and wrapped in gauze, rested nearby. What did they want, really? Madison finally asked, her voice raw. Sheriff Dean hesitated. Then he opened a manila folder. Your father, he began, was working on a specialized canine training project for seizure detection. Shadow was part of the early trial group, but when the funding dried up, the dogs were scattered. Madison nodded. That part she'd suspected. What no one told you, the sheriff continued, is that Shadow was the only successful responder, the only one who could sense pre-seizure symptoms consistently. Madison felt the room tilt. They wanted him for research? Yes, Sheriff Dean confirmed. But they weren't willing to go through ethical channels. And they weren't expecting a girl with a limp and a notebook to stand in their way. He closed the folder. They didn't know who they were dealing with. In the weeks that followed, the Carter family rebuilt. Slowly, the town rallied around them. Local businesses donated supplies. Volunteers cleared debris. And Mrs. Green started a campaign. Keep Shadow home. Donations poured in. Support letters. Even a visit from the real National Canine Service Association, who had heard the story and wanted to help, this time genuinely. But the biggest change wasn't in donations or public attention. It was in Madison. She had faced down powerful adults, risked her life in a fire, and saved not just a dog, but a legacy. And as she sat beside Shadow's recovery bed, stroking his paw, she whispered, "They thought they could scare me into giving you up." She smiled. They have no idea what we're about to build next. It took months to rebuild what the fire had destroyed, but in its place rose something stronger than wood and nails. The old shed was gone, along with most of the training supplies and the familiar scent of her father's boots. Yet Madison didn't grieve its loss the way others expected, because somewhere in the ashes, something else had taken root. Not just survival, purpose. The new building wasn't large, but it was thoughtful. It had been designed by neighbors, funded by strangers, and painted by the very children who had once trembled in crowds and struggled with words. Now, they painted their handprints in bright colors along the back wall, signing names that just months ago they hadn't dared speak aloud. At the front of the building, above the double barn doors, hung a wooden sign, "The Shadow Rise Center, where broken things heal together." And right below the name, carved into a beam of oak, was a single sentence from her father's old notebook. Training is not about control. It's about trust. Madison stood beneath it on the opening day, her hair in a messy braid, her knee brace hidden under jeans now worn from constant movement. Shadow sat beside her, posture alert, breath even, a faint scar still visible above his right eye, a quiet testament to what they had both survived. When the ribbon was cut, it wasn't a celebrity or a mayor holding the scissors. It was a boy named Eli, 8 years old, with a stutter so severe he hadn't spoken in public for years, who whispered, "Go ahead, Shadow," and watched as the dog tugged the ribbon apart with a gentle pull. The crowd erupted in applause. "But Madison," she cried, not from joy, from recognition. Because just like her, these children were no longer being seen for what they lacked, but for what they could still become. The weeks that followed were full of new rhythms. Tuesday afternoons became reading with Shadow hours. Children with anxiety, dyslexia, or simply too much to carry alone sat beside him and read their favorite books aloud. Shadow never judged a single mispronunciation. He simply listened, breathing deeply, as if absorbing their courage. Thursdays were for the Seizure Buddies program. Madison worked with kids recently diagnosed with epilepsy, showing them how Shadow had learned to sense her own episodes. They practiced mindfulness, gentle command training, and how to spot early warning signs together. On weekends, the center hosted open community sessions, lessons on animal empathy, training basics, and even storytelling workshops. Madison's story had inspired others to speak. Survivors of grief, veterans with PTSD, parents with special needs children. What had started as one girl's mission to save a dying dog was becoming a movement, and it wasn't long before the rest of the world noticed. A year after the fire, a quiet ceremony was held in Washington, D.C. Madison, now 12, was invited to accept an award from the National Association for Therapeutic Animals. Shadow sat by her side as she stepped onto the stage. She didn't speak with a microphone or rehearse a formal speech. She simply held up her father's notebook, looked out into the crowd, and said, "My dad taught me that you don't need to be whole to be worthy. Shadow taught me that again, and now we teach that to others." The room stood in silence, not the kind born of obligation, but the kind that holds reverence. When the applause came, it echoed through every heart that had once believed they were too broken to belong. The recognition brought attention. Media outlets ran stories. Donations arrived. And most importantly, letters pour in from families across the country. "My son has stopped hiding under his desk when school starts. My daughter asked to read out loud in class for the first time in 2 years. My child no longer feels alone." Madison read every letter. Shadow sat beside her for most of them, tail flicking softly, as if sensing each weight and each victory. But through it all, Madison remained grounded. She still fed Shadow by hand some days, still monitored his seizures, still kept the backup bag packed, just in case a hospital trip was needed, because being a hero didn't make him invincible, and being strong didn't mean pretending the hard days were over. That was the beauty of it. They lived in the mess. They thrived in the recovery. They taught from the place that still hurt a little, and that was what made people listen. One afternoon, as autumn began to return to Redmont and the leaves curled into gold, Madison sat in the small garden behind the center. The space had been planted by Mrs. Green, who now visited less frequently, but always left behind warm bread and quiet encouragement. The garden was silent, except for the wind, until Laura, Madison's mother, joined her, a cup of tea in each hand. They sat for a while, without words. Then Laura said softly, "I spoke with someone today." Madison raised an eyebrow. From a national institute, her mother continued, "They're starting a program to train kids with empathy and natural instinct, like you, to become youth handlers. They call it the Junior Handler Initiative." Madison's mouth curved into a half-smile. "Sounds familiar." "They want you to help write the curriculum," Laura added. "Lead a workshop, maybe even train others like you." Madison leaned back on the bench, eyes on the sky. "I don't know," she said. "Teaching is different than doing." "You've already been doing both," Laura replied, nudging her gently. "The only thing that would change is the number of people you're helping." Shadow, resting near their feet, thumped his tail once in approval. Madison looked down at him. "Guess we're not done yet, huh?" That night, as the center emptied and the lights dimmed, Madison walked the quiet hallway, checking every room like her father used to do back in the day. She ran her fingers along the wall, where photos now hung. Pictures of children with shadow, laughter frozen in time. Outside, she stepped onto the porch. The wind carried the scent of leaves and wood smoke. She knelt beside Shadow, now older, slower, but still steadfast. "Do you remember that night?" she whispered. "The fire, the smoke, the bag." Shadow blinked slowly, pressing his head into her chest. "You saved more than my life that night," she said. "You saved his work. You saved who I was becoming." She kissed the top of his head. "I'll carry it from here." In the distance, the town lights flickered on, one by one, and inside a small training center built on the ashes of shed, a legacy burned brighter than ever, not of perfection, but of perseverance, of second chances, of the quiet, unwavering belief that broken things are not the end of the story. They're the beginning, and if you listen closely, you'll hear the heartbeat of something beautiful still becoming.